Hello everyone, Nathan here with PixelPipes, and today we're going to feature a card that I just recently got from a friend of mine. It is a BFG GeForce FX 5500 PCI. And no, you're not mistaken, I have featured a 5500 PCI card before, actually a couple of them. I have one that's a 64-bit card from EVGA, and another one, a no-name generic Chinese card with a 128-bit memory interface. They have varying clock speeds on them, but this one is pretty special because it's clocked a lot higher than the ones that I've used in the past, including the PCI Showdown video that I did a little while back. This one has a core clock of 290 megahertz, but more importantly, its memory is clocked at 400 megahertz compared to only 266 megahertz for the other 128-bit card that I had, which kind of negated a lot of the advantage of the 128-bit memory interface in that card compared to the 64-bit one. So I'm really interested to see how this one performs, and you know, we're just going to do another playing with video like we did with the TI 4600 way back. And just kind of, you know, see what it can do, see what settings it can run games at, actually play games, and get a feel for what this card is really capable of. Just a laid back, just sort of low-key video. So sit back and enjoy. All right, so we got the card installed, and if you hear any like kind of whispery noise in the background, well, that's the test system. It's actually pretty noisy, all things considered. It's got a lot of old fans in it, and old fans tend to be noisy in that era. Early 2000s, but as you can see here, the clocks are, like I said, 290 for the core, 400 megahertz effectively for the memory, and I calculated it out. This actually has over 50% more memory bandwidth than my previous 128-bit PCI 5500. So that actually, well, kind of makes me wish I had this card instead of the other one to use in the PCI Showdown. But we're going to go ahead and see what we can do. I'm leaving the core clock at the 290 that it comes. It's the BFG OC edition. And 1024 by 768 is the current desktop resolution. Excuse the mess, by the way. I do use this system for testing. All right, and you can see we got Quake 3 here. Again, 1024 by 768, max out the texture detail, trilinear filtering, and we're just on tier 1 here. We're just going to quickly move through one or two of these. Ranger. I do not have a splitter, so I'm playing this, viewing it directly through OBS. That does introduce some latencies through the capture card, and I'm using that completely as a scapegoat, just in case my skills here are less than exemplary. You have taken the lead. He took that armor piece, the bastard. But yeah, you can see this is running really smooth here. We've got 91 locked, which if you don't know, in Quake 3 originally, is the max in-game frame rate the engine supports. If you disable FreeSync, in order to get a higher frame rate, well, the engine would run faster, which is fine for benchmarking, because if I were to run a benchmark right now, obviously that cap would be lifted, but the game would be running a lot faster. But I might show that here in just a second. But I mean, obviously by 2003, Quake 3 was not considered an intense game by any stretch. This is a game that came out in 1999. One of the first games to require a 3D accelerator. For obvious reasons, this was way too intense to render in software on CPUs of the time. It's getting in my face. I spend more time benchmarking than gaming for sure, so my skill is not great by any stretch. But yeah, we got through that, no problem. I would hope, at least. Let's run the benchmark. It's pretty simple here. Shouldn't take that long. So we're just gonna go time demo 1. And actually that's all we need. And let's go straight to the demos. And yeah, the sound is also enabled while it does this, so the sound is just total chaos, but it runs stupid fast with an uncapped frame rate. But yeah, it's actually running under the 91 that the engine caps at, so 88.7. It's pretty good, pretty conservative resolution, but you would expect to have to use that. And like I said, this is a game that came out in 1999, so even budget cards of the era could run it perfectly fine. Let's just play a little bit more here, and then we'll move on. Of course, the FX series has the reputation of not being very good for Pixel Shader 2.0, or I should say Shader Model 2.0 games. You know, that was a problem for games of the time, but if you just wanted to play an older game like this one that was all fixed function, bastard's always grabbing haste, you know, like a game like this would be completely fine on any FX card, including the lowest end models. Just gonna let this guy kill himself. Or not. And that, of course, extends to other older games. Even DirectX 8 games that did use a lot of shader effects were just fine on the FX series. I mean, if anything, its hardware was almost tailored for that era of games. The shader units in it were more at home, running at a lower precision, which was, you know, the sort of thing that you would see on older DirectX 8 titles anyway. On the other side of the coin, we have Unreal Tournament, the original. You can see here, it's looks like it's got VSync enabled. So actually, so we don't get dramatic changes in the frame rate, let's go ahead and force that to be disabled by first going into the NVIDIA control panel. And for vertical sync, we'll just turn off application controls. And now it should work no problem without VSync. Now this little intro thing here is often used as a benchmark for the game. It's obviously on Rails.
Violence among deep space miners.
And tends to be pretty intensive for you know, older cards at least.
Working with the NEG, established a series of leagues.
But yeah, the frame rate's a lot higher now with the VSync disabled. Announcer volume is all the way up, which distorts. I'm not sure why the game does that, but let's go ahead and... Oh, I don't have any save files. That's fun. Again, a very old game that you would not expect to have any issues running on this hardware. This is the GOG version of the game. I forgot to mention that Quake 3 is also the GOG version. In my experience, the GOG versions tend to run a little faster than the Steam versions, which is good for Windows XP, since, you know, obviously you're not going to be using Steam anymore on there. I think the mouse sensitivity is a little too high. Let me change that. That feels a little better, so we'll just go with that. One of my favorite things about Unreal Tournament is the ability to lunge in different directions. So that's a nice way to dodge. Of course, we're not here to really talk about the gameplay of Unreal Tournament. But obviously this is running really well. Again, pretty conservative resolution, but I'm not trying to push it absolutely to the limit here. And, you know, an old game like this, you'd probably prefer to run at a higher frame rate than pushing the eye candy. Well, preferably you'd want both. But on a PCI card of any kind, really, you usually have to make some sort of a choice. If you want a good frame rate, or if you want it to look good. So, of course, this is the first match, so the gloves haven't come off yet as far as the game is concerned and the difficulty level. I've used this level actually a lot for sort of just background footage, mainly because it's easy just to jump into the game, and you know, it's the first level, so in deathmatch mode. Let's see, where did he go? Of course, this was one of the games that I used when testing the TI 4600, and apparently PixelPipe has won. Go figure. I know what I think might be more interesting, though, is Unreal Tournament 2004, because this game came out at the same time as this card. The original 5200 released in 2003, but this particular PCI variant was released in 2004, a little later. We'll do deathmatch again and ranking, and see how it runs. Again, at 1024 by 768. I think I'm going to stick with that resolution for pretty much every game. And before the match starts, we can get kind of a flyby look at what the frame rate's like without any characters on the screen, which is usually dramatically higher than after the game gets started and the game becomes populated. Just to show you real quick, here are my settings. Everything's on the highest. I did disable detail textures, but in theory, there's no reason to not enable that. This card, I believe, has 256 megabytes of memory, which is pretty typical of a card with a 128-bit memory interface. But let's just see what happens. This is definitely a game in which you want to have enough memory, especially on a PCI card, because I've got other PCI cards that are fast, but you know, potentially faster than this one, in fact, but they don't have enough memory to play this game with lots of characters on the screen and at a reasonable resolution, and it just grinds to a halt. There's no, obviously, ability to do AGP texturing across a PCI bus. No DMA memory access or anything like that. So you want to have enough memory on the card so it's not having to make any extra trips to system memory to pull any data. So obviously a game that streams data as part of its engine wouldn't work, but these older titles tended to load everything into the memory that the game needed. Yeah, if you had enough memory, everything would be loaded into, you know, your VRAM, your system RAM, and everything would run smoothly, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, this is tough, of course. I'm not really paying attention to how I'm playing, just because I'm more interested in the frame rate and kind of the stuttering and such, and it's really kind of what you expect. I've got too many NPCs on the screen at any given time, and it really just grinds down to a, you know, really low frame rate. Looks like it's hovering around the 20s generally, which honestly isn't terrible for a PCI card. I mean, we are running at max settings here. This is a budget card from based on hardware from 2003, mind you. But I want to see if I can get a little smoother than this. So one of the things that PCI tends to struggle with is geometry detail. So we want to put dynamic mesh LOD on low. Character detail, we want to, let's just put that on normal. World detail, we'll put that on normal as well. I'm not worried about texture detail or anything like that. Again, all that stuff gets loaded into memory and then it should be fine. It's going to be limited a little bit by memory bandwidth, but this card has a pretty decent amount of bandwidth for what it is. Let's just leave it at that and see what happens. Oh, actually, let's disable foliage as well. Don't know that this level has any foliage, but so far in the flyby, I'm not really seeing a big difference. So we might have to lower texture detail as well, but let's just see. Mesh LOD is a lot lower. Character detail is a lot lower as well. So it went down to 29 there, but it is staying around the 30s. That was an accident. I mean, obviously I'm aiming at the character, but I could not see its head. Oh, okay, there you go. I just walk into the laser. But hey, that's fine. If the game wants to make me look good, I'm okay with that. Now here, yeah, this is back down to the 20s again. So we're not quite there yet. Let's try some more. All right, let's back all of these settings down. We'll disable detail textures. We'll put character shadows on blob. And I'm noticing some interesting rainbow effects here. Okay. I mean, you know, back in the day, there are plenty of, you know, teenagers and just people on a budget who would play games at frame rates like this. Yeah, this spot right here, I'm not sure that there's anything that can be done to make that frame rate reasonable. It's just a big mosh pit of NPCs at any given time. But I mean, if this is all you had, I mean, this is a pretty typical card for a person that had a system that didn't have an AGP slot. You say, you know, 2004, there were a lot of Dell Dimensions out there, like the 8400. It's kind of an infamous one. Based on the Pentium 4, of course, but a lot of them lacked AGP slots. So, you know, you had to just work with what was available. And unfortunately, a lot of times cards like this would be overpriced just because, you know, there's a little bit of a niche demand for a PCI card like this. And they would have been a lower quantity type product. So yeah, something like this, a 5200 or 5500 PCI would have been... Actually, I think I stated earlier that this was a 5200, but it's actually 5500, so my mistake. Something like this would have been more expensive than the AGP counterpart for that reason. You can imagine in an online match, it'd probably be even crazier than this. Actually, this card came from a situation just like that. This was given to me by a coworker, because I do have a real job besides this channel. And yeah, it was just something that they had in their garage that they had purchased, probably for a system that lacked an AGP slot. And you know, they had to pay a premium. I think this card costs over $100, which is, you know, crazy for what it is. But you know, it's PCI. That's how it went.
You have lost the match.
Oh dear. And in case you're curious, here is everything on the lowest settings. I did leave on dynamic lighting, and this is probably the best case scenario. Let's see if it can run smoothly. And holy crap, is that ugly. Wow, I can't even imagine somebody actually playing this here. 16-bit color as well. Hey, gotta hand it to it. It is a lot smoother. Stop shooting me. I'm trying to look at fraps. Can I at least get some of the texture detail up a little bit? You know, it must be the fact that it's running in 16-bit color mode that's really doing it. I mean, this is a different level from the last one, but I mean, it's like 40-something is the lowest I've seen, which is pretty good. Generally, it's hovering around 60 or so. This looks a lot better here, so actually I could see somebody having a pretty good time playing the game like this. Again, back in the day, a person that was on a budget. I will say this about Unreal Tournament 2004. It's really smart about dithering. It does a really good job. And of course, dithering becomes less of a problem the higher the resolution goes. I mean, it's on a per pixel basis, so if you have a high resolution, it's kind of like having a high-res TN panel that's trying to act like an 8-bit panel. I mean, you're not going to really see the dithering because it's going to be really fine-pitched. And only on some of the kind of the explosions and the transparencies does it really become apparent on here. Well, I'm thoroughly dead. Alright, the next game I'm going to try is Serious Sam the Second Encounter. And this is a favorite of mine for benchmarking because it really is just a great title for showcasing fixed function hardware. It came out in 2002. It was pretty demanding for its day. Not sure why the screen cap is a picture of my arm. Oh, hey. Yeah, this is the one where it glitched. It's my character model. This is single player, by the way. It's acting like it's multiplayer, because you know it mouses over and then you can see their health and their ammo. Oh boy, this frame rate's a little bad. Serious Sam is really a game where you need a high frame rate because the game, just the input latency lags so much at lower frame rates. Oh boy. I tend to run a mixture of settings, mostly high, almost maxed out really. I don't have any anisotropic filtering or anything like that. Let's go ahead and grab this. See, my mouse cursor really overshoots. When I try to turn around, it's like the mouse is trying to catch up with my movement, or the screen, I should say. I'll be honest, I'm not really in the mood to change the settings in this game. I mean, it is technically playable, it's just... In most games, this would be fine, but in this one, really, you've got to have... Ow, that was right in my face. You've really got to have a high frame rate. In excess of 70 frames or more, I would say. Hello. Now, as good as this game looked in its day, really it was more about just the number of characters on the screen, just throwing in a huge amount of detail. You can see the textures are very high resolution for the time, heavily using detailed textures to enhance the detail further, as detailed textures tend to do. And, you know, it does a great job with that, but I mean, this is not necessarily effects heavy. I mean, even a budget card from 2003 should be able to run it no problem. And it basically does. It just, you know, I think also the capture card is kind of enhancing the lag here a little bit, but I don't know, they're just kind of working in tandem against me. I hear the frame rate's really high. Go figure, when there's like basically nothing on the screen except fire and a wall. Hello? Oh. I'm locked in here. What do I need to do? Probably go through this obvious opening. Something happened. Ow. Oh yeah, this will lower the frame rate. Anyway, that's a pretty good look at this game. But let's play a game more contemporary to this card and kind of explain why the FX series has the reputation that it has. Now granted, by no means is this game the most optimized there is. I mean, you can see by the title screen, all it's rendering is the halo ring and a static background, and it's running at 30 frames per second. It's not entirely the fault of this card, but it's obviously not where you would want it to be. Let's just say ATI was running a lot faster. Oh man. Yeah, so I mean, this is a game that does utilize shader model 2.0 effects. Granted, replicating a lot of the effects done on the original Xbox with Pixel Shader 1.0, but I digress. This is completely unplayable, so what you need to do is exit. Right-click the shortcut, and just like we did in the TI 4600 video, we gotta add dash, use 11, and that should force Pixel Shader 1.1. And that just outright doubled the frame rate here at the title screen. Why? I don't know. There's no shader effects going on that I can see. But even still, okay, we went from 11 to 14, 13. That's not great. That's still not great. So let's turn off speculars, turn off shadows, turn off decals, particles on low, texture quality on medium. And so there's basically nothing but bump mapping going on at this point, and we've increased the frame rate by 2 or 3 times. It's still not playable, but it's a lot better. Also looks like crap. Wow, that looks bad. Oh. So now we just lowered the resolution to 800 by 600. This is SVGA, folks. And we have a frame rate that I would consider just barely playable. At least at this section here.
Shuttle bay door again. Move in and drop off reserve troops on my signal. I copy, Cortana. Echo 419 standing by for your signal.
We're down to the 20s over here. This big open arena. Ow. Yeah, you're just not gonna play Halo on this card. You could play it again with a reduced resolution on other FX, you know, more powerful FX cards, but not the budget ones. Not ever, pretty much. Not to say people didn't get desperate back in the day, but you weren't going to play this game with any sort of comfort. One game that has been a pleasant surprise for me on PCI cards is Far Cry, and we're here at on 1024 by 768. All settings on medium, and we're just gonna jump into a checkpoint here. This is a game that heavily used shader model 2.0 effects and then later 3.0 effects with some patches. And you know, it's also something that has really good support for DirectX 8 and DirectX, even DirectX 7 hardware, as long as it's NVIDIA. Really? Still not dead? Oh boy, I just got mauled. Let's see, we can even go to low settings just to see how smooth we can get it. Alright, so the game's not very pretty on low settings. Actually, you know what, the texture quality would be probably about par for like a 99 or 98 era game. Try not to suck this time. Well, that didn't work. Well, you know, if I was a budget gamer in 2004, this would be pretty acceptable, honestly. These guys are about to get mauled. Pretend that didn't happen.
Eyes and ears. Keep it tight. Did you hear that?
Little vicious fleas, aren't they? Okay, well, but as I rage quit, you can obviously tell that the game plays really well at low settings, but I mean, it's not a bad looking game at low settings. There's a bunch of good ones to try here, but I think I'm gonna go with one of the tougher ones here on the desktop. Yep, Doom 3. As you can see here, the game is running at the lowest settings. However, In the advanced menu, pretty much everything is turned on, so those will probably have to be disabled, but we're going to try it without doing that first. Low, medium, and high settings in Doom more corresponds with the amount of VRAM that you have. So low would be good for a card with 64 megabytes memory. Medium would be good for 128, and so on.
I'm gonna need you to grab some armor and secure your pistol before I can pass you through security.
Not sure why the audio is so loud. Well, as you can see, the frame rate is quite low. We do have shadows and everything turned on. So I disabled the EAX effects and reloaded the game, so the audio shouldn't be so distorted. I think you have to lower the volume in order to avoid that, but I'm not really sure. I haven't messed around with it too much. I'm using an Audigy 2 ZS, so that should pretty much be,
You're looking for the science.
you know, ideal for a game like this.
Not sure you are. Listen, Scotty. I've done this a million times.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
Why don't you crawl your fat ass down here?
Let's see what happens when we disable shadows.
Because I'm getting paid to make sure you do it.
And let's see that.
The coupling so we can continue.
Yeah, I gave a few more frames there. And here it's actually pretty smooth. Of course, you can see here the frame rate's still pretty low, but if I go back and disable pretty much every effect, you gotta leave bump mapping on, otherwise the game looks way too ugly. Bump mapping is most of the game's detail, so gave me about 4 or 5 extra frames there. It's probably about the best you can do, but I don't really think this game is all that affected by PCI bandwidth. I really wish I had a save closer to, you know, where there's actually enemies, but I think it's a pretty good idea of how this game runs. And lastly, I think we're going to end the video off on Painkiller. Let's see. I have dynamic lights set to ultra, but I'm not sure that's going to work on here. Let's just see what happens. Oh boy. Okay, yeah, no. Looks good. But no. Alright, here's what I settled on for now. Character shadows and all that stuff turned on, but high-res model weapon has been turned off. Bloom has been turned off. Dynamic lights normal. Particle details low. Everything else pretty much normal. And then for the texture detail, everything's been set to medium. And that results in a pretty high frame rate, actually. So let's just see what happens when I get some enemies on the screen. Okay, that dramatically went down. Hang on a second, I think the shadows are probably doing that. Let me just try disabling that. Oh boy. Yep, it was the shadows. So now it's running a lot better. Might even be able to turn up some of the texture detail. Alright, everything's set to high except for character textures, because you know there's a lot of characters on the screen. It's running pretty smooth. I'm impressed. A little bit of screen tearing there, but you know, that comes from running such a blistering high frame rate. No, not really. Anyway, that's a pretty good look at the GeForce FX 5200 PCI, the OC edition from BFG. I can probably play this game for a while like this. This is actually really enjoyable for being such an old PCI card. But thanks for watching. I'm Nathan, and this has been PixelPipes.